Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
Hey, Colin, I hope you can tell, and I hope our listeners can tell, I got a new mic, so the audio should be a lot better from here on out.
I mean, I'm just saying from what I can hear, you do sound a lot better. I didn't think you sounded particularly bad lately, but certainly this is a marked improvement. So at the very least, if you think I sound fine, you think Kevin should sound fine. If you think that we're both bad, well, eventually we'll fix that too. But we haven't heard anything like that yet.
I mean, you're wrong, but you can think that.
That's a great way to get us an audience, Kev. Just insult our audience.
I'm sorry, you all are wonderful, intelligent, perceptive people, which is why you're listening to a podcast on one of the greatest indie niche RPGs out there.
Yeah, Nish is right. I was talking to a friend of mine who basically said, I like JRPGs, but I don't know what the fuck this series is, and therefore I am not the audience for this podcast. And I said, you're absolutely right. This is for the weebs out there, including the two of us.
Yeah. So why don't we get into the meat of the episode? Because chapter 2 of Trails in the Sky FC, I thought it was markedly different from chapter 1. A lot more focus on the characters.
Yes.
Not as much combat. It's shorter for one, and we don't get as many big boss battles, lots of random encounters and so forth. It's really about Joshua and Estelle.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just, our assessment on the whole, this is more of a character development chapter. There are some plot points, and there are more plot points in here than you think, because I know what's coming. But at the same time, it really is focusing on the developing relationship between Joshua and Estelle. But even before we get into any of that, the chapter opens in a mysterious way, right? We have a black screen, and it just says, two men's voices, and they're having a conversation. You kind of have to guess which one's talking at any given time. And it turns out, once the light pops up, that it's Olivier talking on the phone, talking on a cell phone in a world in which we've not seen a cell phone before. And it appears like from the different bracer guilds and stuff, everything had been tied to landlines, but this guy has a cell phone. And he's talking in a very mysterious way. Olivier seems to have some kind of mission that he's here, but he also tells whoever he's talking to quote, "Don't get caught looking into things by the Chancellor," which is the first time that we are hearing mention of the Chancellor of Erebonia, who is going to play a much more important role as the games go on. But even here, we're talking about it. At the end of this scene, Shara walks up and demands to know who Olivier is. And Olivier reveals that he's from Erebonia, and he's here on a mission to meet with Cassius Bright.
So it's essentially almost a prologue to the chapter. Non-playable, unlike the prologue for the entire game, but it's different spatially, temporally, different characters, and it colors how we see the chapter to come.
Yeah, I mean, I would say less it impacts how we see the chapter to come, but what it's hinting at is that there are larger processes at work. While we are focused on Joshua and Estelle, there's things happening in the rest of the world that we might see, we might not see.
Yes, but I would say it's meant to impact how we view the chapter because it's in the chapter, which is a deliberate choice. They could have put it at the end of chapter 1, but placing it here, start of chapter 2, I do think, I'm not sure how yet, but to me it seems it's meant to inflect how we see this chapter. But I guess at the end of the game, I'll look back at this and say, oh, I have a better idea now why this mysterious scene is in the start of the chapter.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, once we're done with this game, we're going to have an episode about like going back and seeing all these disparate things, and then have some predictions for the next game. But I mean, so you bring up that this scene is supposed to make us change how we view the chapter or set up how we're going to view the chapter. But even you say that you don't know how yet you played the chapter with it in mind. Like, to me, it changes nothing. Maybe it's because I already know what's going on, but even when I played it for the first time, there was an interesting tidbit. Okay, there's stuff going on with Olivier and Shara, but now we're back to Estelle and Joshua, and I'm following that story the whole way through.
So maybe I should amend my statement and then just say it's setting something up with a delayed payoff.
Yeah, that I agree with for sure. But so after that, we have this scene. We go back to our dynamic duo, Joshua and Estelle, and they head to the Krone Pass checkpoint because their next goal is to get to the city of Rouen. While they get to the Krone Pass checkpoint, they stay the night, and who shows up? But Agate, the red-haired bracer that we had seen before, and then monsters attack. We have to go help them out.
So Agate, Joshua, and Estelle team up to fight off the monsters. This is the first time we get Agate as a unit, as a game
Yeah.
unit, not just someone who's impacting the narrative, but we can see him as a unit. So, what kind of unit exactly is he? Is he DPS? Is he tank? Is he a rogue? Is he support? Is he a mage? And so forth. What does he do that Estelle and Joshua do not do?
I mean, he's like definitely big damage all the time DPS. It's helped by the fact that he's a much higher level than the other characters are. But if you look at his skills, they're very offensive focused. One of his crafts is to cut off his HP to gain CP, so he can do more of his crafts faster. Also, he has a fire attack that covers in a small attack area, which means that much like with Sherazard's whip, he can hit multiple enemies at once, and it hits like a truck. Also, if I remember right, he has a lot of red quartz equipped, although that might be later. I don't think I ever cast an art with him when he was in the party for this chapter, because I just like using his crafts and his normal attack enough. What were your thoughts?
I would agree that he's not meant to be used as someone who casts a lot of EP. That's their primary way of helping out in combat. He's up front in the front lines, physical, dealing out damage per second. And he can take hits too. Maybe he's not, quote, a tank, but he's much more sturdy than, for example, Joshua, and I would say also Estelle.
Yeah, I mean, I want to caution us about making that kind of comparison right now because Agate is a much higher level than Estelle or Joshua. Even at the end of the chapter, I'm at like level 18 with Joshua and Estelle, and he's level 24, which is a big difference.
Oh, but since I was playing on hard, I thought he was much closer in levels, and that may be the case.
Well, you can't check now. We finished the chapter, so you can't check his level. But I'm
Because
fair.
he was not 20. He was not 20 for me.
Oh, interesting. Well, he was 24 at least at the end of the chapter. I didn't check his level at this first fight, but at the end when we're at the lighthouse, I saw it there, and he was 24 there for sure.
Stepping back from him as a unit, Agate, he kind of softens how he talks and views Joshua and Estelle.
Yeah.
What they did, helping him, it's not half bad, which for Agate, that's quite the compliment, especially if we look back and think how much scorn he had for them just a chapter ago, a couple days at most.
Yeah, I mean, for people like Agate, phrases like "not half bad" means they're pretty good. If he ever says something like "you're pretty decent," it means like "holy shit, you're amazing. You have my respect." So this is definitely a turning point. And you've had an observation about how Estelle reacts to Agate and to other characters.
How, when Agate is critical to Joshua and Estelle, Estelle is the one who does not take this line down. She lists and defends what they did, their accomplishments. But Estelle has an entirely different way of accepting praise. She's almost unwilling to do so. A bit later on, when we go into the Bracer Guild HQ in the city, and Joshua and Estelle are given some commendations for being the ones who helped with the Sky Bandits, for everything they did in the city in general. And Estelle is very self-deprecating. She doesn't accept it. She's like, no, we didn't do that much. It wasn't just us. We had help, so on and so forth. So it's this I'm awesome, fuck off to Agate and others, and nah, I'm just right place, right time. Lucky I had help. When others are saying, you did a great job.
I think to some extent, this is just a natural way to react to praise versus criticism. Like, whenever somebody compliments me, I'm not trying to say I'm the best guy out there, but I'm not saying fucking right, I am the best. No, you downplay it. or when you get a compliment from somebody who rarely compliments. I mean, okay, you're shaking your head vigorously, Kevin. When our former mutual advisor would compliment you, how would you react?
I took it as my due. I knew that I was good at my job.
Well, I'm glad to have your confidence. When Eric compliments me, I don't act that way. But no, normally, like it's just an instinctual thing to say, I don't deserve all this praise. It was nothing. It's why we have a common phrase, no problem, when somebody thanks you for something. But at the same time, if somebody's going to attack you when you actually think that you're right or that you're competent, it's natural to push back.
So you think if I said Estelle has a self-confidence issue, that would not be how you interpret her character so far?
Yeah, I don't see her having self-confidence issues almost at all.
I'm going to mostly agree, but I could, devil's advocate. I could see this brash exterior hiding a more cautious, am I really able to do this insecure interior self-conception?
I mean, that's for sure true. Don't get me wrong about that. I just don't think that that means that she has a confidence problem. Everybody has moments of self-doubt, but she still also goes out and does the stuff she needs to do.
She does. And she does not let them take over her. She acknowledges their existence and moves on anyway, which to me is more interesting and better than someone who never suffers from these doubts at all.
Yeah, for sure.
Her rage without fear is recklessness.
All right. So after that, Agate leaves. He's heading back. He's heading down the trail. Joshua and Still go down the Krone Pass as well, and they get to Minoria Village where they meet Kloe. You had predicted in the last episode some things about Kloe. You knew that she was going to be important.
I predicted she and Joshua would hook up.
Yes, which they have not.
I was wrong.
You were wrong in this chapter. Maybe they do later. I'm not going to tell you. And you were right also when you predicted that we would have a mage type character. Kloe is a mage type character.
Yeah, she fills a hole that the gameplay is really lacking, especially as some of these quests that we do in this chapter, the side quest, have enemies that are entirely immune to physical damage.
Yeah, let's talk about that fight for a second. We're kind of jumping the gun here a little bit, but that particular side mission I think is really interesting. You think it's bad design, so I want to talk about it a bit. So essentially, we get an exterminate quest where we have to head down to Saphiro Tower, and the enemy that we have to fight are, I think, 6 helmet crabs. And the helmet crabs can either attack you or summon palms. And what palms do is they take your EP away. The problem with the helmet crabs is that if you attack them physically, they take no damage and they hurt you. So you have to attack them via your arts. You can't even really use physical crafts. So we both had trouble with this. Kevin, why do you think it was a bad design fight?
I think it was a bad design fight because it was not balanced in the way physical versus or EP, mana, magic. Because what I think should have been a balanced fight was they attack for physical, and you need to get your casting speed, your critical timing before your health points are consumed and you die. The way it is now, it's you have to do this while at the same time having the debuff of getting your EP drained away, which means you have to go to physical, which means you just die anyway. It felt a bit unfair.
To me, this fight teaches the player 2 things. The first is the importance of arts. Because I don't know about you, but for me, the majority of attacks that I typically use with Estelle and Joshua are normal attack and crafts. Arts, especially in the beginning, you tend to not use because they take multiple rounds to get off, whereas you can just hit the A button and do some immediate damage. And it's not always obvious that the arts will do more damage unless there's like a massive weakness to a given element. So this fight forces you to make sure that you have good arts equipped to both of your characters. This is assuming that you're doing it with only Estelle and Joshua, which is what we both did. We didn't have Kloe for this fight. It probably would have been easier if we did. The second is that because we're not using arts very often, EP is not really a concern. You don't really run out of it very often. In this fight, you do. So the game is kind of stressing to you this is another resource that you have to manage. And the way that you manage that is by having EP charges or food that will heal your EP. So now you're starting to use items more actively and thoughtfully in this fight than perhaps you had been doing before.
I'll acknowledge the points you made for that, especially with managing items, managing EP, to make it not just button mashing A to victory. But I will say it was, in theory, that sounds good. But to me, the execution, how many times I died, had to restart, and have the difficulty get lower each time. The initial balance of how strong they are, how strong the levels that Joshua and Estelle have for this, the disparity felt too big.
It's definitely a difficulty spike, right? And it's not a difficulty spike that carries through the rest of the chapter. The rest of the chapter is not that difficult. I don't think I died on any other fight other than this particular fight.
Oh, I died
No,
a
that's not
fair
true.
amount.
I did die a couple of times. I take that back. There were some tough fights.
I died a fair amount. About every boss fight, I died at least once.
Fair.
But what I do is if one of my characters die, oftentimes I'll just go for a TPW, total party wipeout, so I don't have leveling up XP disparity.
Yeah, I sometimes I'll do that, or I'll try to get the character up right before I do the final blow. But I've especially since the experience system slows down as you level up, it's pretty easy for underlevel characters to catch up. So you're more or less going to be at the same. So with the final boss fight of the chapter, Joshua did die near the end, and it was either I can kill this guy now or he's going to kill somebody else. So I just killed the boss, and yeah, Joshua didn't get experience. Whoop-de-doo. We'll get over it.
Colin, what do you think how the game handles unconscious party members do not get XP for the fight?
It's a design choice. It's not one that I like. If I were a game designer, I like it when party members get the same amount of experience no matter what, whether they're dead, whether they're in the party or not. If you have let's say you have 5 characters, you can only use 4 at a time. I always like it when reserve people get EXP as well. But this is not an uncommon decision. And it does kind of pressure you to try to get your party members up. So it does add a little bit of decision making into the fight.
Overall, I like it. Sometimes if I die in the end of a big party battle with bosses, it's kind of annoying because I have this dilemma that you had in the end with you.
Yeah. So that's a tangent that we went on. We were talking about Kloe. She's looking for a character with a little boy with a cap on. So we get the sense that, she's attached to some little kids, but we don't explore that yet. Instead, Estelle and Joshua get a lunch, take it to a windmill, a pier area to look out on the ocean. And I think they have kind of a cute little lunch scene in which you start to see them getting a little bit closer. What were your thoughts about it?
I think the beating heart of this game is the relationship between Joshua and Estelle. And seeing them grow and change and become, I don't want involved to be taken in the wrong sense or maybe just a premature sense, but really coming to know each other in ways they couldn't or didn't in these 6 or so years they spent living under the roof of their adopted dad, Cassius, and how they're relating to each other as independent, autonomous adults, learning more about their hopes and fears and weaknesses and what makes them go. I think it's done so well. It's done so respectfully to those 2 characters, but especially to Estelle. She's not flanderized. Her emotionalness is not ha ha ha, big buff woman be crazy, but she's coming to know who she is. She has a better idea of who she wants to be, and she's passionate, she feels, and she's beginning to share this with Joshua, and I think it's just unexpectedly awesome.
Yeah, no, it's really well written because with this scene, you can see Estelle's just being Estelle. Right, with
Yes.
her, you can just feed me the stuff, and and then she shoves the sandwich into Joshua's mouth. I laughed out loud at that because that's such an Estelle thing to do. Meanwhile, Joshua is a bit more reserved, kind of he's not really sure what to do. He also has all this baggage that he's carrying on, right? We talked a little bit about that, but you still see him. He's still close to Estelle. We start to see some indications in this chapter, both from other characters and from him, that maybe he's starting to develop some feelings as well, but he's expressing it in a much more reserved way, except for a couple of periods in which it kind of explodes out of him, like at the end. But we'll talk about that at the end.
After lunch, Joshua and Estelle, they go and they meet an orphan.
Yes, an orphan named Clem, who appears to be very cute, and then steals Estelle's bracer badge. And Estelle's like, what the fuck? We need to go spank that kid's hiney right now. And they run off to the orphanage, where she proceeds to try to do just that.
It's a nice contrast to the more serious but still lighthearted connections and opening up that Joshua and Estelle were doing. And then here, 2 minutes later, we see Estelle going down into the level of Clem, a 7-8-year-old orphan, and being at his emotional maturity level.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Clem seems to be a troublemaker. He has a portrait, so you're like, ooh, he's going to be important. But we get to the matter. Estelle is trying to punish him to get back the badge, and Kloe pops up. Turns out Kloe is related / connected to this orphanage in some way. And in order to stop Estelle from manhandling one of the orphans in her charge, she sends an eagle at her, kind of like a Pokemon.
I will have a lot more to say about this eagle later, but
it's a falcon, Kevin. It's a fucking falcon.
I will have a lot more to say about this bird later, but it came out of left field and it continues to come out of left field even more later on. It's a weird incident in the game, but more on that in 30 minutes or so.
Whenever the hell we get down there, because we are definitely taking this outline a bit slowly, but that's fine. I like it. So yeah, we have this scene at the orphanage. We meet Matron Theresa, which, when you found out her name was Matron Theresa, you're just like, lol.
Of course, it is it's not even hiding it. It's just,
you remember blatant. Mother Teresa? It's that bitch again. Except that this one doesn't appear to keep people in poverty. And in any case, so after we talk to them, the three of us, Estelle, Joshua, and Kloe, head down to Rouen, which is the main city that we're going to be exploring in this chapter. You know, where you have your weapon shop, where you have your ordnance stuff, the guild and everything. And we need to kind of wander around a little bit because there's a meeting going on upstairs in the guild. Therefore, we can't check in yet. And so we wander around and we end up in the warehouse district, where some gentlemen from the other side of the tracks attempt to hit on the lovely ladies of our party.
These gentlemen from the other sides of the tract are extremely crude in how they proposition Estelle and Kloe. It's not left to the imagination, which in retrospect, I was a bit surprised at how open sex is treated in this game. It's not lewd by any means, but not just the existence of it, but it's just something that people do as a pastime for pleasure is something that's not really done in a lot of RPGs, a lot of JRPGs, where we don't see this kind of openness. And it's even more surprising for a game that's, by this point, almost 20 years old.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's not just this game. Certainly, the rest of the Trails in the Sky trilogy is this way. People who have played through the series know of a very infamous scene in Trails the Third, behind what's called a star door, that you will get to, that I am really looking forward to seeing your reaction to that, because it is one of the most poignant and emotionally involved scenes in fiction that I think I've ever seen. So I'm looking forward to us talking about that. But the question that I have for you is, so you've played Cold Steel 1. That you're not a complete newbie to the series. Would you say that the way that Trails in the Sky treats sexuality is different or the same compared to Cold Steel 1?
It's completely different. It's completely better.
Yes, I would agree with that. To me, the Cold Steel games do kind of back away a bit from the maturity of these earlier titles.
We'll get to Cold Steel 1 in a couple months at the very least.
Oh, it's
But
going to be a lot more than that. We're taking like 2 months to beat the first game.
this quasi harem that's built around Drain, the subsummation of characters, of the woman characters into what their bodies can do, how they relate. I thought it was one of the worst parts of Cold Steel 1, which was a very good game. I loved it, but I did not like how it treated gender and women, how it treated sexuality and sex. I thought it felt like a cheap 90s anime or manga.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. But as you say, we're not at Cold Steel 1 yet. We got a lot of other games between now and then. So these gentlemen from the other side of the tracks, these gentlemen of attitude, they're called the Ravens. They seem to be a street gang that runs the not the inner city, but the lower streets of Rouen. And very well known to the mayor, as we find out when Gilbert Stein comes up to kind of like break up the scene. He's the steward to the mayor. I like Gilbert as a character. Not so much in this game, but he's one of my favorites, and you'll see why in a couple of months. But I'm just flagging that for you right now.
Oh, well, I thought we would never see him again, so now I'm pretty curious.
I really want to say something that's going to blow your mind, but I think it might be too far as a spoiler, so I'm not going to. But I'm just going to say that I love Gilbert.
I have no thoughts, no theories. My head is empty. I don't have a basis on which to build a guess. But something we do see in this scene is really quite interesting. It's what Kloe says after Gilbert comes to the rescue. Kloe says that she's
Well,
not surprised.
Right, and remember, the mayor comes as well, which triggers this comment.
Yeah, the mayor is part of House Dalmore.
Yeah.
And Kloe says that this is a long line of well-bred aristocrats. She's not surprised he's the mayor. She's not surprised he came to the rescue to help these good citizens against their socioeconomic lessers. It's not said outright, but the implication is very clear. And I thought this was really interesting because of how uncomment worthy the game takes this to be. It's but well bred as something, yeah, of course, this is something that exists. Nobles are qualitatively, and these are good qualities, they're supposed to be or they are different. This generational lineage is supposed to make them better. And we see lots of nobles, especially some very close to the mayor himself in this chapter who are not like this. But this idea that nobility is supposed to make you better, and if you don't, if you're low based or corrupt, look how I said low based, that's the exception. I don't think that in an American type style game, we would accept this as something unquestioning, or if we did, it's really one of the markers of the fantasy genre, where blood will out is something that is a staple. Blue bloods, lineage, your ancestor, these are all so important. And it's really interesting to look at and be like, wow.
I think it's interesting as well to look at it from the socio-political context of the kingdom of liberal. This is not a democracy. There are some democratic institutions on the local level. I said a couple of weeks ago that we would see an election in this chapter. We don't. I got it confused with something else, but we will see in second chapter an election about who's going to be the mayor. So there are some democratic institutions, and Kloe even says that we don't have nobles anymore. But clearly, this is a recent thing because we're going to talk about the play at the Royal Academy later on in the episode. And one of the questions there will be, what's the narrative purpose? But one of the narrative purposes is that play shows us liberals' not so distant past of nobles being very strong and sometimes corrupt even. So even within the same chapter, like you do have this cultural expectation that there's such a thing as good breeding, but it also provides you with like a dozen of counter examples, and which I think highlights the fact that while there may be a cultural expectation that nobility can be a good thing, the reality is different.
And I wonder, Colin, building off of this, all the nobility we see in this chapter, when this idea of good breeding, of stock, of lineage is really prominent, they all fail to live up to this ideal. I wonder if it's a subtle or subtextual commentary on the matter to highlight the juxtaposition between theory and reality.
Could be, could be. I think we'll have to play more of the game to find out. But certainly, all of the people that you know of as nobles so far in this game, including the Sky Bandits, which, yeah, I think they basically said they had land, right? And so we can call that noble if a noble is somebody who owns a piece of land. We have the Sky Bandits, we have the Mayor Dalmore, and we have Duke Dunan, who are all horrible people, or at the very least, unpleasant people who do bad stuff. But speaking of bad stuff, moving on to the next plot point, that orphanage that we had just visited the day before, that thing goes up in flames. It seems that somebody has done this deliberately, which we'll find out in our investigation of it. But luckily, the matron and the orphans get out safely because of the efforts of a mysterious silver-haired man.
Yes, and here is another part of the multi-step. Joshua knows much more than he lets on, much more than he should for someone of his age, of his experiences. Because clearly he knows this silver-haired man who got the kids to safety, or at the very least knows of him. And when investigating the burnt-out husk of the orphanage, Joshua knows a lot about setting fires, about arson, in a sense. He's able to identify where the fire began, and it began outside, and it began deliberately because of how the flames scorched, burnt the wall, which Estelle knows nothing of.
No, I think the most interesting thing about Joshua's reaction to this, when he ends up learning about the silver-haired man, is that thinking through this logically, we've already established that somebody did this deliberately, and that somebody chose to set the fire, right? And then the only person that you know of who has been there is the silver-haired man. So you can, I would say, pretty logically say he's probably the one who set fire to the orphanage. But instead, Joshua says, we can safely assume that he is not the culprit. And when you can see this as perhaps, well, if he had set the fire, then he would not have rescued the orphans and the matron, and that could be. But to me, it still seems as an odd leap of logic for Joshua to make, and he's not given to fanciful leaps of logic.
No, he is very grounded in reality. He presents a very polite exterior to the world, but it's pretty clear that he knows a lot more than Estelle about the lows that people can and do sink to, whether by choice or by it being forced upon them.
Indeed. So the whole reason why we find out that the matrons and the orphans are safe is because they're in Minoria Village. So we go down to the inn where that information is revealed, and lo and behold, who do we find there but Gilbert Stein and the mayor as well. And Gilbert suggests that it was probably the Ravens, the lowlifes that we had encountered before. So Gilbert says something that it's probably the Ravens. The party pushes back and says, well, we don't really have much evidence for that. Seems like a weird thing to accuse them. But unfortunately, Clem had overheard that part of the conversation and had taken off to chase after the Ravens, which we're going to have to go chase after him for. But before we learn about that, the mayor of Rouen offers the use of his villa in Grand Cell for the matron's use while she gets enough money to rebuild.
Yeah, it's an example of noblesse oblige, of the mayor showing his breeding. He's putting to use the intergenerational wealth and housing and social capital for the common good. It's the player is meant to look at this combination of the political authority with the nobility in a literal sense, and also the metaphorical. He is a noble from a line of noble families, as this is what these kind of people should be doing, using their vast resources for the good of all.
Right. And the characters comment on his generosity. Certainly, when you see the scene, you think he's being generous because, a hugely traumatic event had just happened. And the guy comes up and says, at no cost to you, I want to help to make your situation better. I mean, you can't really get more generous and nicer than that. So after that, we head off to chase after Clem because we got to save his ass. We end up getting, after some running around because the drawbridge had gone up, we have to get to a boat. We get across the river and we head over to the warehouse and we beat up the ravens. And this is where Kloe becomes a playable unit because she needs to fight in defense of Clem. And she reveals that she has been trained to fight with a sword, quote, in defense of others. The other thing that I like about Kloe are her crafts. She has this one attack in which she sends Sieg out like a Pokemon, yells, Sieg, take him down. And it does some damage, but it also reduces their strength and defense for a turn, which means that your other characters can do more damage and they're going to take less damage. It saved my ass a lot in the final boss.
It's a really good item system because it has trade-offs. It's not uniformly positive, and uniformly positive items or systems, crafts, whatever in a game that don't have, here's why you shouldn't be spamming this all the time, it's not a good game system.
The only negative I can think about using it is that you're using CP, which means that you can't activate her S-Craft, but her S-Craft heals you. So you might not need that as much as you're going to need Joshua or Estelle's.
But also at the same time, maybe it doesn't become so game breaking because Kloe is in for what, half a chapter?
Yeah, I mean, for now. She might
Yeah.
come back, you'll see. I don't know.
Oh,
I said might.
that's a
All right, I'm going to shut up now. Anyway, no, I've already alluded to you the fact that she's one of my favorite units, and you can take from that what you will. Come on, we talked about that before, like yesterday. Either way, moving on. We beat up the Ravens, and then Agate shows up and starts to kind of throw his weight. I know that you have some thoughts on this because you wanted us to talk about the normalization of violence.
Agate does not throw his weight around. He throws their weight around.
Exactly. Yeah, he beats him up. And it seems that he has some kind of authority amidst this crowd. They know who he is, and he knows who they are. And for that reason, he seems to feel like it's his job to beat the ever living shit out of them.
It's expected. It's normal to him. And that raises an interesting question about the normalization of violence with the Bracer Guild. Fighting monsters, it's all but said you kill them. And in some cases, it's textual. Fighting humans, you only beat them up. You're still giving them, what, concussions, maybe contusions, broken bones, sprains, whatever. But it's this normality of putting serious damage onto fellow humans. And oftentimes it's in self-defense, but I have to wonder about what this does to the psyche of people, of bracers. This separates them from most civilians who don't engage with this as a normal part of their duties.
Sure, I can see that. I think with Agate in particular, he would have been normalized to violence even without being a bracer because of his past, right? Jean tells us later that he was a Raven, that he was part of that gang. And in fact, that it was Cassius Bright that beat him up and kind of turned him into somebody who was going to be a bracer. So this is part of just who Agate is. In terms of the other bracers, the analogy that comes to my mind is the US military, specifically those who are in the Pentagon. You know, one of the most common features of foreign policy decision making is who's going to be pushing for a military solution. Oftentimes, people will think that it's going to be the military because number one, it's them. So of course they're going to want to be used, and also they are used to the idea of using the military as a tool because that's why they exist. Also, though, generals will point out that oftentimes they will be the last ones to say that they should be going in, that it's really more civilians that want them to do it because they are aware of the consequences of that violence. And we kind of see that with bracers at times where they might want a more diplomatic solution than a violent solution. Look at Estelle dealing with the monsters in the prologue, right?
Yeah, Estelle in the prologue, she successfully is able to not exterminate them, but to give them a good whipping, send them on their way, chastened. They won't come back to the forum again.
Yeah, and that's not the only time that stuff like that happens throughout the series. So I think that we have a gray line between if violence is really normalized or not.
That is Estelle in the very beginning
That's true.
of her career.
That's true. She's not even a junior bracer, or she is a junior bracer, but it's like her first real mission.
If we can extrapolate what happened in 5, 10, 15 years down the line, would she still take that option? I have no way of knowing, it's only a guess. I would bet in general, few would take this kind of peaceful option the longer they're in the job.
Could be. We'll have to see. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
But then something happens that I put in our notes that you must be really happy about, because Agate takes the case of the burned down orphanage from us because, quote, we're too close to it, we're too personally attached, and therefore we might make silly decisions based off of our emotions.
Thank you, Agate. Some sensibility here. Now, if only people could be doing this to Joshua and Estelle about the hunt for their missing dad.
Well, I mean, I don't think that they are on the mission to hunt for their missing dad. They're hoping it's a byproduct, but we have that letter already, right? Saying that he's safe, don't worry, go off and, become senior bracers.
Yes, we have that, but it's clear that they hope Joshua and Estelle, they want to find him, want to do more. They're curious about what he's doing with his top secret mission. And as someone who's played more than one game, there is no way, I am certain, that this mystery fails to get resolved at about the climax of the game.
Well, again, I will neither confirm nor deny. But yeah, so we get that case taken from us. And the next mission that we're assigned is to go to the Yennis Royal Academy. Before we talk about that, though, I did want to talk about one of the side quests, which I've learned that you did not do. And but people should do them. This one is it's reported to us from the mayor, or rather from Gilbert, saying that something had been stolen, a candelabrum. And when you get there, you get a note from quote unquote Phantom Thief B. Phantom Thief B, he appears in almost every game as part of the side quest, where he will lay out riddles for you, and then you have to figure out the riddles and run around the map and, okay, go to this location. Okay, here's another riddle and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then you get a big reward for it at the end. This is the first time that we see that, which is why I'm highlighting it. But it sets up that formula that continues on for the rest of the series. I like Phantom Thief B. He gets more development later on. And so it's kind of cool, like having gone through all of that to see where he starts, especially since technically speaking, you run into him. He's in disguise, but you run into him even in this first game.
Now, Colin, one question I have is, did you find them hard to solve?
Well, I can't say that I really gave them much of an opportunity to be solved. I remembered one of them off the top of my head from when I first played the game. And I don't remember how hard it was or easy it was for me back then. And then after that, I decided, what's easier? Look this shit up on a guide, because I don't need the brain teaser. Plus I've already beaten the games. I don't need to have my brain teased that way. I just wanted to go through the quest for the story. So I just pulled up where I have to go. I went and did it. And then bada bing, bada boom, I got my 5 Gs.
Do you think it was helped or hurt by there being no quest markers?
Definitely helped. This would not, like, the magic of the Phantom B quest would be immediately broken if by default in the game, it told you where to go. Now, I chose that for myself, but that's a personal decision. by default, it forces you to think about things and go and find where it is.
And that's not unique to the Phantom Gate quest, the Phantom Thief B quest, this lack of quest markers,
No, this game does not have quest markers.
which is kind of unusual in some respects.
I mean, it could be a sign of age. As you pointed out, this is a pretty old game. And later Trails games do have quest markers, as you know, but certainly these older ones don't.
But you have to pay attention to the dialogue of when the quest is being given, where to go, why, when, any special conditions, because the brief summaries you get in the notebook are just that. They're short. They don't give you much information. They don't reproduce the conversation. So you really have to immerse yourself into the world, into the text.
I agree. I will say that part is a double-edged sword for me. Sometimes the journal is a good way to jog your memory, but if it's a thing where like I'm starting a quest, okay, I'm going to end the game for tonight. I don't remember all of the pieces of the dialogue when I get back to it a day or two later, and I check the journal and the journal is next to useless. That's going to force me to look up the solution. And then that is defeating the whole purpose of getting me to pay attention.
It's a double-edged sword because you cannot expect the players to have the same kind of familiarity with what was said in a piece of dialogue you may have last picked up a day, 2 days, 3 days ago, compared to in universe in which Joshua and Estelle are paying very close attention, I have to imagine, when they're being given items to do.
Yeah, probably. One would hope, right? Do you have anything else?
Joshua, at least.
Yeah, at least Joshua. Estelle might have her attention pulled off by something else. Do you have anything else about SideQuest that you want to talk about before we move on?
Nothing comes to mind, no.
So after we do our side quests for this part of the chapter, we head over to Yenna's Royal Academy to help Kloe out in the play that their student council is going to be putting on. And so it's kind of like a whiplash a bit, right? Because we're doing all this epic stuff. We have this crisis that we're dealing with. All right, now boys and girls, go help out with the school play.
So Colin, how many boss fights do we have in the Royal Academy arc for this chapter?
How many boss fights?
Yeah.
None. There's no encounters in the Royal Academy, at least not here.
And this is a pretty long episode within the chapter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid, I would say a third of the content of the chapter, at least in terms of main quest.
And just keep this in mind as we talk about what comes. It's a huge portion of the time spent mostly with dialogue screens.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking before how you were playing a visual novel. You're used to this kind of a thing. But to me, like I describe this as visual novel, the chapter, because there's just so much reading dead, which I don't mind. And it's a trademark of the series. But no, here there's not a whole lot of gameplay. There's a lot of talking, which is interesting in and of itself.
It's some very good talking.
Yeah, primarily I think because here we're starting to push on Estelle's latent feelings for Joshua, right? We kind of saw it before at the Purcell farm and stuff like that, but here it's becoming a bit more obvious. Estelle is starting to admit it more to herself. And I think that the play is also a big push in that direction.
Yeah, it's a way to have Estelle and also Joshua, but primarily Estelle, wrap herself in an explicitly alterity. She is not Julius, the noble. And so she can express herself through this separation, this divide of acting, of being someone who is not her, to engage with her own feelings, to recognize and come into contact with these feelings that she kept hidden from her conscious mind.
So you've mentioned, but why don't we talk a bit about the play so that then we can talk about how, A, what the play is doing, and then B, how it impacts Estelle and Joshua's relationship. So with this play, it's essentially a historical drama, right? It's a retelling of a legend from about 100 years ago, in which we have a noble knight, a commoner knight, and a princess. And the two knights are fighting each other, both because of distinct class interests, and because they both love the princess and they want her hand in marriage. The interesting thing about this rendition of the play is that they're flipping all of the genders, where the women are playing the knights and the men are playing the women. And apparently Joshua is a really pretty girl.
We get an entirely new portrait for Joshua as the princess. And if you didn't know they were the same, I think you could show it to two new players and have them agree this is Joshua and his sister.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the characters even point that out, right? Like a bunch of guys saying, if I didn't know that you were there, I'd have the hots for you.
So on the one hand, we have a haha cross-dressing funny that in typical for RPGs, JRPGs, a lot of media in general. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if this is intentional or not. I want to say it is. Cross-gender casting was really big in certain avant-garde theater circles of a particular generation to experiment with breaking across and out of gender expectations and gender norms within the confines of the alterity of the theater.
I mean, certainly Jill herself uses that as the excuse to get the play approved. Doesn't necessarily mean the characters are thinking that, but the game presents it to us as an option.
Yeah. And it's a way, I forget the exact line, but it's about killing off gender expectations entirely. So
Yeah.
I
But what's also interesting here is then what the characters themselves do in the context of the play, because the winner of the duel, who's going to be Oscar, that Kloe is playing, gets to kiss the princess, Joshua, at the end of the play. So Kloe and Joshua, they don't hook up as you were predicting, but they did make out a little bit. And Estelle doesn't really seem to like that.
No, she's jealous. She's encountering this jealousy for the first time. In fact, that and she's understanding I'm jealous, or this emotion that may be jealousy, it's because I want to do that with Joshua, or I don't want someone to be able to do that with Joshua, and that means I can't.
Right, precisely. And she's still figuring that whole thing out. But this is like the first, I think, the first concrete moment of which we really have like a romantic feeling on the side of any one of them.
Most of the time, I think in this type of media, characters who are like, I don't know, what could this be? Do I have feelings? I think it's really tired. It's worn out. It's not in general how people above the age of say 14 function. But in this circumstance with Joshua and Estelle, I really do think it works very well because she has to get outside of. Estelle has to somehow break or bypass the I lived with him as a sibling, a step sibling to be sure, but a sibling in sibling conditions under the same roof for quite a lot of time, for 5, 6 years. So in this case, I think it very much fits the character of Estelle and Joshua.
But I think also the game is going out of its way to build it slowly and is laying down the groundwork in the previous two chapters to like make this believable. You know what I mean? To show where the relationship came from and how it's developing. It's believable that we get here. It seems like it's a natural progression of their time spent together.
Yes, it's not this slapdash hurriedly hookup for a couple of reasons. One, the role they want they is for a lot of people, me in particular, I think it's a lot more fun and engaging to interact with and see in the once the couple gets together, but also the slow time to build. It's a way for them to discover their feelings within the context of becoming adults, junior bracers to senior bracers from 16 onward as they transition into adulthood. And it really fits the thematic journey they're going on as they complete the recommendations for this game.
For sure. So, Kevin, you have a question here. We talked about this before. What's the narrative purpose of the play? We talked about how it impacts the characters, and that's important for the narrative as well. But, you know, why do you think that they chose this subject matter of the play uh, for us, the players? Like, why this and not a different kind of play?
That is a very important question because we have to answer why did they take in about an hour, I think is a reasonable estimation of this arc in general. And the play itself, the performance and the stuff surrounding it is a very high percentage of the Royal Academy episode. Why do it in an already shortened chapter? This may be the single most heavy event or the longest single event of the chapter. So why do it?
As you mean like time wise for the cutscene? But it's a very
Yes.
long cutscene.
Yes. So we have this tension between the nobility and the non-nobility, the commoners. Though I want to emphasize that Chloe's character, Oscar, is a commoner, yes, but a very wealthy, or the scion of a very wealthy merchant family. So it's not like
Yeah.
peasant versus nobility.
No, it's more like Knights of the Sword versus Knights of the Rope.
It's about who can get into this oligarchic almost seat of power with the monarchy. With the monarchy as an institution in this play, it's passive. The princess, the royal family, they accept the outcome of the duel. They're not proactive. They're not showing they are the source of political military power, of sanctioned state violence. It's more who gets to be the advisors.
The princess does not accept the results of the duel. She does give Oscar a kiss, yes, but she is consistently saying that she does not want the duel. Her agency is expressed in not marrying anybody, which will only exacerbate the tensions. And I agree that she's not like an active mover in the play, but I don't think it's safe to say that she will like just accept whatever happens.
But before that, when she learns of the existence of the duel, neither she nor her parents say the princess royal will marry whom.
Her parents are dead. That's the whole point. Whoever marries her will be the king.
But it's interesting how the regent does not immediately quash this threat to the power of the monarchy, because whoever wins, the nobility, the merchant families as a class, or Julius and Oscar as individuals, they will essentially become one of the key players within the state.
Yeah, I mean, Cecilia could have done, and I think she wanted to. She seems poised to be a Elizabethan, virgin. Therefore, I'm not tied up with anybody kind of figure. And technically, at the end of it, she still is. I mean, it's her death that brings the two sides together. So I think within the context of this play, we could have had a situation in which the commoners or the nobles take power over the rest of society. Instead, what we have is both of them try to do it. The princess sacrifices herself, both for love and for to preserve the power of the monarchy to some extent, which ends up with both sides agreeing to lay down their arms and live in harmony.
Yes. And we also see divine intervention in this play.
Absolutely. Idios comes down and like verbally bitch slaps everybody watching.
And then resurrects the dead Princess Cecilia.
Precisely. Which then, but even there, it's like the two knights agree that they will have a duel later to decide how they're going, like who's going to marry the princess, but it will be done with wooden swords. Here, honor, like Julius gives it over to Oscar because Oscar had previously been wounded. So there's honor brought back to the fore. And honor is still a theme because they're going to have that duel, but now it's going to be non-lethal. It's like this acceptance of the agonistic tensions between commoners and nobles, but done in a way that isn't going to harm the state.
Done in a way with an outlet to relieve tension between them in such a way that it will not get pent up and boil over into, say, armed insurrection, a palace coup, or what say you.
Right. So that's a good reading of the play. I already talked a bit about how it's asking us to think about the role of the nobility. And I think that there's some foreshadowing going on as well. We have to remember that this is about the kingdom of Liberal, which we are currently in right now. But what are your thoughts about, what is this getting you to think about in terms of the present day plot?
It's getting me to think about what ways are there for underrepresented or sidelined groups to acquire and maintain political power. It seems these tensions that we saw in the play, they've not completely disappeared. That's my understanding of what the situation is like, how there's still some agonistic competition between the nobility and a more inclusive group of commoners who are not just rich merchants. Say, Mayor Mabel from the previous chapter. She has more in common with the nobility, with the mayor of this town, than, say, an average peasant. And just it seems that from what we've been seeing of the world, how there's this circling of blades within the various groups of what kind of political situation will we end up with. I think that's the overarching plot of the game. What will the kingdom look like when the first chapter is done? That's my impression so far.
Okay. I think that's very interesting thoughts for sure. And I'm going to move on so I don't say anything about it. But one thing that we did skip over, because I think we've talked about the play enough, but right before the play starts, Josh goes missing because he thought he saw the silver-haired man. We know that the silver-haired man was there because we see him at the end of the play. He was watching the play. It's the first time that we, as the audience, sees it. But I know that this is where you want to complain about Sieg as a character.
Don't you mean Sieg as a deus ex machina?
If you want to call him that, go for it.
So Sieg the bird is said to be the familiar of Kloe. And when we meet him in the orphanage, he has some rudimentary intelligence, can do basic skills. He intervenes to help his master what he thinks may be an unfriendly situation. It's not, but it's an animalistic intelligence. And then somehow, by the time of the play, and we see this also in the end of the chapter, Sieg can understand and follow complex commands. Where's Joshua? Find him and lead us to him. And we haven't seen this is possible within the world of the gameplay of what the universe of what we've been led to believe is and is not possible. We've not really seen beast taming in this kind of way. It's not remarked as unusual. It just comes out of
it
left
is marked
field.
as unusual. Agate is like, what the fuck is going on here?
More than Agate, everyone should be like, what the absolute fuck?
I mean, Joshua and Estelle are also like, what the absolute fuck? And they're the only ones, those three are the only ones that have seen them who don't already have a relationship with Sieg.
Well, I'm not going to let evidence get in the way of what I'm saying.
You are a humanist. So, I mean, I see where you're coming from. Certainly, this breaks the bounds of normality. For some reason, even when I played it the first time, it didn't strike me as that bizarre. I guess just accepting the fact that this is at its core a fantasy story, that this is a kind of thing that can happen. And I don't know. I kind of like Sieg as a character. I like him gameplay wise when you're using Chloe's S-Craft. And I think that I don't know. I like Sieg a lot. I'm not really mad at him for having to suspend my disbelief. To me, it's just something that gets woven into this world. Now we see that that's possible. Okay, well, maybe it'll happen again with other creatures.
Okay, if it's foreshadowing, I won't mind so much. But seeing it here, it was like, what?
Sure, fair enough. So at the end of the play, it turns out that the school had done like a charity drive to raise a crap ton of money to help the orphanage rebuild. They raise about 1 million mira, which is a lot of mira. That's a lot of cash. And instead of writing her a check or anything like that, they take all of the cash and put it in one envelope and give it to her.
Yes.
And then someone's like, maybe that's a little bit dangerous. Nah, she'll be fine. 5 minutes later, she's attacked on the road, knocked unconscious, all the mirrors stolen.
In a world where people crossing from one city to the next have a very definite possibility of being attacked and killed by monsters, just sending off a matron with orphans carrying more money than most people will ever make in their life, not even a proper escort worthy of the situation. This is a moment where it's clear the plot triumphs over common sense.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess the counter argument would be that the roads are relatively safe in between Rouen and Minoria, and they're just heading back to Minoria, and they already did give her a guide. They couldn't have predicted the power of the people who were attacking her, because how would they even know about it? It just happened. So I'm not necessarily mad at that. One thing that I do want to point out is that, so we exit and Agate joins us. So now we're 4, and somebody runs over to give us the news, and we tell him, go to Rouen. We don't have time to go back there. We need to head to Minoria. So I head to Minoria, and the first thing I find is a monster that says that I can exterminate it or leave it, which means that it's a quest monster. So I exterminate it, and then I'm like, why don't I just go back to Rouen to report this monster kill, which I do. The game lets me do. So even though Joshua just said we can't go back to Rouen, that's literally the first thing that I do. And Jean doesn't seem to mind it at all.
It's a common feature in time-sensitive quests that do not have a corresponding gameplay time sensitivity. How many fantasy games, RPGs, are there where the doom of the world is quickly approaching, but yeah, you have time to go to the forest to level up, berry picking, or whatever.
Right.
At some level, you cannot say you have 2 minutes to make the journey to Minoria. Just at some point, making this fun has to triumph over what does really make sense in the confines.
I agree. At the same time, I think that if they had just done something where when you're about to cross the threshold into Rouen, Joshua says, no, we can't go back there right now. We have to rush to Minoria. That would keep the game and the story on the same track. And then you just report it later after you're done with the fight we're about to have, which very easily could have done. It's not essential that you report this monster kill right now. But as a player, I feel like I have to because I have the ability to.
Yeah, I think that would have been good. We see this in other parts of the game where you cannot leave or go into a certain area.
Yeah. So after that, we head into Minoria. We learned that Krone and Theresa had been attacked by black-cladded individuals. Thanks to Sieg, we find out that they were headed towards the lighthouse. So we head to the lighthouse. I know Kevin is still like, look at this fucking bird, he sees everything. So we head to the tower. The ravens are there, but the ravens appear as if their minds have been wiped. It's more mind control stuff. This is the second time we've seen mind control, I think. There was the Sky Bandits and the Ravens. So we beat them up, and then we head up to the top. And who do we find? We find 2 black-clad individuals, and we find Gilbert Stein.
We also find a knocked out lightkeeper.
Yes, which you hadn't seen before because you didn't do that side quest, but he is hilarious. And like, he hates young people. And it is amazing how he's written. He's one of the best side characters I've seen so far. But now he's unconscious and you don't know that.
Now I'm sad. Now the only thing about him that's noteworthy is what Joshua has to say.
And what does Joshua have to say?
Sleeping powders.
Yes. I mean, he saw that with Theresa and with Krone as well. I don't know. Actually, I don't think there was sleeping powder on the lighthouse keeper. I think he was knocked out normally.
You're right. My apologies, listeners. Joshua saw Krone and Theresa, and he immediately understood it was sleeping powder, how it was applied. So this is just another instance of the game telling us, not really subtly, Joshua, there's something going on within. And there's a huge clue given in the end of the chapter after the final boss fight.
Right, but we haven't gotten there yet. We fight these black-clad guys. Gilbert fucks off and leaves. It turns out that he had hired these black-clad individuals to, to take the money back to rob the orphans. He doesn't exactly say why, so we need to go figure out why. No, that's not true. He talks about how the mayor wants to build beachfront property, and the orphanage is going to lower the property values. So he has to take care of that situation. I believe, Kevin, that when you got to this point, you texted me, quote, the mayor did nothing wrong.
Gentrification is bad. But if you want to solve the housing crisis, you need to build and to release and lessen or eliminate zoning regulations to encourage more building in location. So I understand and sympathize with what the mayor wants to do.
But that doesn't have anything to do with burning down the orphanage. He wants to burn it down so that when he builds luxury houses, the property values stay up.
Yes, but
if he was building high-rise apartments, you'd have a point.
He's misguided. And then let's move on before we get into further sidetracks.
Yeah, he's misguided. So after the black-clad individuals threaten to shoot Gilbert in order to get out, and then do shoot Gilbert and then get out, we head back to Rouen, and we're going to confront the mayor. We don't have the authority to officially do anything because we're bracers and there's a non-interference with government agreement, which allows the bracers to operate anywhere, is that they will not interfere with matters of state. In the meantime, two things have happened. The Bracer Guild calls the Royal Army to intervene because they can intervene with government officials. And Kloe acts super sus because she's like, oh, I need to run to the Royal Academy real quick. You guys go on without me. And instead of doing that, she writes a letter to somebody and sends it via Sieg and then runs back quickly. Clearly, she's getting in contact with somebody who she thinks will help the situation.
So I think it's pretty obvious Kloe is not what she seems. My prediction is that she's some sort of, and it pains me so much to say this, teenage student secret agent working for the government in some capacity. And I just cringed so hard. But she's familiar, it's alleged, it's implied she got the government, the military, to come help arrest the mayor in the final end of the chapter. She has an extreme familiarity with the rapier, and we should think about that as she can go toe-to-toe with a bracer for combat ability. Is this just the result of the occasional, even weekly sword lesson in a controlled situation?
Well, look, I know who she is, so I'm not going to
Yes.
contribute to this conversation. I would point out that she does note in one of her conversations that she has a noble upbringing. So it is certainly possible for her to have been raised with swordplay in mind, which she outright states that she was. But
Yeah, but there's a difference between knowing how to use a sword and using it without flaw in a combat situation like she does.
sure, be that as it may. So we confront the mayor, and it turns out the mayor is trying to sell land to Duke Dunan. We haven't talked much about Duke Dunan in this episode, but he's kind of off to the side, just being a pain in the ass to everybody. He's second in line to the throne and is very, very entitled and loves to spend money. It turns out that the mayor had racked up a lot of speculation debts in a couple of trips to Calvert, which is a republic off to the east. For the tune of like 100 million mira that he owes. So in order to pay that, he's been siphoning funds off of the city's budget for his own plans, and also he's been accelerating his plans to build this beachfront property so that he can get the money to pay back his debts.
Yeah, he's one of the nobles we meet in this chapter who is not noble. He's venal, he's self-serving, he's a coward, he's corrupt, and he's the first in line to the throne because the queen has no children to pass it on to them.
Yeah, her children died, so therefore he's next in line. So we accost the mayor. I was going to say we accost the emperor, but we accost the mayor, and the mayor sicks some huge monsters on us. Like he just hits a button and they come running out of the wall, and it's almost like a Valentinian the first episode where he just has two pet monsters fighting out for his pleasure. Except now they're going to be fighting us for his pleasure, and these guys are kind of tough. You know, it's a tough fight.
Oh, I died a couple times to them. If they hit the same character, two of them in a row, that can lead to an instant death.
Oh, for sure. And don't even get me started about trying to bring them back up because you're going to use a reviving bomb, which will heal like 100 HP. Unless you can heal that character immediately after, they're just down on the ground again.
Yeah, it took me a lot to figure out a strategy for the boss fight. And that boss fight strategy for me was die enough so that the difficulty and the HP kept getting lower and lower. I could survive.
I don't remember if I have that option enabled. I know I did for Trails the Third when I played that. I don't know if I have it applied for this, but it is kind of like it's a double-edged sword, that mechanic for this series, right? Because on the one hand, it means that eventually, no matter what, you're going to get past the fight, which is a comfort, right? It means that you'll always be able to progress. But on the other hand, you know, maybe I don't want it to be lowered right away. Later games will give you an option to retry and lower the difficulty. And I like that, where you can do it on a case-by-case.
I mean, for me, I want to beat it on the first try. And for the vast majority of fights I do, but I also don't want to be what's called soft lock, where it's through the character choices or the gameplay I've made leaves me at a unable to continue under normal circumstances because the fight is just so tough.
Yeah, for sure. And this system does essentially make that an impossibility.
And it takes a while. It's not, half as easy after one life. It takes quite a while for it to go down. I think it's a very good system because it's slow.
So once you die enough that the enemies get weak enough that you can kill them, the fight ends, and we're about to arrest the mayor, this time with the authority of the Bracer Guild, because, well, he just attacked us. We have clear evidence of illegal activity. So I guess now it's not intervention. Now it's self-defense or something that we can do. But all of a sudden, our characters freeze because Dalmore is using an artifact that appears to just be able to paralyze everybody around him. He starts going off like a Bond villain. Should I kill you first or kill you first? Or maybe I'll kill you slow. And it's kind of maniacal, his villainy. And here's where I think we really see the depths of Joshua. Because once Dalmore starts to threaten Estelle, I mean, Joshua is just like, if you lay a single finger on her, I will cut you limb from limb slowly so that you feel your death. Like, that's some hardcore shit he pulls out.
It's totally not how he responded to basically any other situation that we've seen. And it's because Joshua saw that Estelle was being threatened in a very capable and lethal manner, and something in him just snapped, or whatever the barrier he had for whatever his former life, I think he was a serial killer, whatever separation got melted away by the hot fury of his anger and fear that Estelle could be taken away from him.
Yep. But Dalmore doesn't get that chance because all of a sudden a black hole appears in Estelle's pocket. That artifact that we had gotten at the end of the last chapter has activated, and its effect appears to have been to deactivate the artifact that was keeping them in place. And thus begins a chase sequence.
Colin, quick question for you.
Quick answer for you.
Is this a Deus Ex Machina? Is this an unearned save with the ornament countering this ploy by the mayor so effectively?
So, having played this game before and playing the next game, no. It's very easy to see why it looks like one. I can tell you that with the full context, this episode is important for establishing what that artifact can do, which is going to matter a lot. I don't even remember if it matters so much in this game, but it does matter a lot in general.
Okay, so once we have more information, then what it's saying is it doesn't feel quite so much like, to use a crude term, like an asshole.
Exactly. No, it's not pulled out of it. This scene is deliberately designed. It's not pulled out of their ass.
Okay, so that's good.
A lot of scenes that look like they're ass pulls do tie into later scenes, even in the second game. One, by the way, this is something that I just want to put off as a sidebar. Not all of the questions that we have about FC are going to be answered in FC. We have to consider SC as part of the same game. They were developed as part of the same game. So just keep that in mind.
So my wondering is if it makes sense later on, but say in this chapter, in this game, we're not given the tools to make sense of it, is that a failure in the game design? If it's a logical way, someone can look at this or other instances and say, this is unearned.
I think that it really just depends on an individual's tolerance for that kind of thing, because the other thing is that this artifact is mysterious. It's defined as mysterious from the get-go. We did not know anything about it, and now it acts. So you can either look at this as they're pulling it out of their butt, and this is a Deus Ex Machina, or this is the first time that artifact is functioning. Now I've learned about this artifact.
Okay, so from that perspective, I can see it. I didn't think that this was an egregious break of my disbelief of this was something I felt came out of nowhere, but I did see how you could look at this and say, this is awfully convenient.
Sure. But speaking of awfully convenient, so we chase the mayor, he gets into his yacht, or we get into a rowboat. We almost catch up to him, but then the wind picks him up and he's able to gain speed. So it looks like, we're not going to be able to catch him. When lo and behold, the prototype air carrier from the Royal Guard, state-of-the-art ship, secret, the reporter who's joined us, Niall, cannot write about it because it's not even open to the public yet. But it comes by to arrest the mayor.
Oh, it's very heavily implied this is to whom Kloe sent a message with Sieg the bird somehow. And it's another point in the category of Kloe is much more than she seems.
Sure. I mean, I think the game lays it on pretty thick that she has a close personal relationship with Schwartz, with the Royal Guard. The exact nature of that relationship, you'll find out. One thing
the mayor's taken away. So the mayor's taken away.
Yeah, the mayor's
He is arrested, which is something the Bracers could not do.
Correct. That's the responsibility of the Royal Army. One thing that did strike me as weird is that Schwartz comes up and says that the mayor started making noise about being mind controlled, that he can't really remember the last couple of moments or stuff like that. And unlike with the Ravens or unlike with Dawn, in which you could see that change, this being reported indirectly like that tells me either he's lying, which would fit in his character, or if he's being genuine, it's a really poor piece of writing on the part of the game, because we've seen the real Mayor Dalmore. We've seen him act. I don't think he's being mind controlled at all.
One possibility is he is highly placed in some secret clandestine organization to know this is how disposable minions are treated. This is one of the effects. So if I can claim it, maybe that will reduce or eliminate my culpability in the eyes of the military.
Sure. I mean, I definitely do buy the argument that he might be lying about it, or he's observed it, right? With the Ravens, for instance, because he knew that the Ravens would be mind controlled, I assume, since he told Gilbert to do it.
I completely agree with you, though, that if he is not, that is very bad writing, because again, it's the same kind of deception that we had last chapter, so it's becoming stale. But also, we know that even if he was mind controlled, he still did lots of criminal activities to get to this situation.
Right, even way before when he's going off to Calvert and getting himself into millions of debt.
So I hope the next chapters clear this up speedily with him maintaining all of the culpability for the actions he took of his own free will and choice.
Agreed. Well, Kevin, we've reached the end of the chapter. We've talked a lot. Like this was a long episode. But with that being said, you and I will be in talks. We'll talk about what our next special topic is. And we will see you guys next week for whatever that is. Thanks very much for listening to us. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at Trails in the Pod. And other than that, thanks very much.
Stay frosty.